Good evening.
All right, I'll call the meeting to order at 7:02 as an informational meeting due to lack of quorum. Uh, any additions or deletions to the agenda?
None. Nope.
No. Does appear to be any public comments?
No. Yeah. Nope.
Because there's no public anywhere, and we will
The public meeting.
dispense with the minutes until the next meeting when we have quorum. So that'll bring us to old business in the update from
David,
MDB. Yeah,
David Cotton. David, you're muted. There you go.
Okay, so
go.
Oh, they heard.
so really what we've got here is this is the closing, this is the assessment of existing conditions. And if I can, I'd share my screen.
If it doesn't let you, I can, you know what, I'll just make you others.
You've got Nick's screen, gotta
Um,
share. Host is this, you need
sorry,
to,
you're good. I gotta make you a co-host. There you go.
okay.
Now. Yeah, let me stop sharing. There you go.
And let's see. No. Okay. Share, okay, I'll push share here.
We're good.
Good. Yep, you're up.
Let's see. So, we're up.
You're
You're
good.
up. We're good.
Okay, great. And again, I'm feeling like this is like kind of this for the first phase, the 90% report, if you will. And I think we've been able to collect a lot of good information and these first 6 slides Mary was going to go through, but I'm going to do them, but because she's out sick. And just to kind of recap here, first off, this was a no strings attached, no cost technical assistance being offered through EPA. And really what our focus was to work with you guys and to evaluate areas outside of Otter Creek's area. And we had 4 main items in the scope of work. So, collect the stake, get people involved and interested that were interested, the stakeholder engagement. We've looking to evaluate some different options. We held the site visit, we met with folks, and then the information tonight we're going to talk about is what we've compiled based on that. And then the next step will really be, how do we want to move forward for phase 2? That is the current loose end. So again, thinking about what we have done so far there, we just said that. And so really the final task for the current scope is looking at the next steps for further evaluation, looking for funding support, and developing a phase 2 for that project. And that's really going to take some direction from you all, so the assessment of existing conditions really is a formatted part of this whole initiative. So we were given a template from EPA so that all of these assistance provided have some commonality. And so this table of contents, this is the information we've collected. We'll talk about the community, the environment, what we saw, and we'll just go through all of these modules. And what I'm trying to do is there's a lot of almost boilerplate stuff in there that for us provides that we've looked at the census data, we've looked at income information to make sure we have an understanding of the opportunity. And so we looked first at this, and so what I'm hoping tonight is that I want to, once we get into some of the more technical sections, I want to be able to pick out some of the nuggets that I want you to hear and realize as it's a potential factor for you making your decision. And so this first section was really about the community here, and then we were looking at what are we doing, and what are we working on. Really the population has been pretty static essentially for the past 50 years. And what was very nice for our project was within our area that we were working, we were a census designated place. You are, and with a little bit of stuff outside of that area, but that really helped us work on some of the numbers. We also saw that, through the SRF, and you meet the hardship community criteria because your, medium household income is below the state average, and your unemployment rate was higher. And those things really go to impacting what your potential funding sources can be, because we can look at different pots of sources and they have different priority rankings. This diagram really, the goal is to show you recognize the two areas that were that are part of Otter Creek study. Okay, and they're the magenta here. We then originally started looking only in between these two areas. And what we did do is we looked at the drinking water service area, and then we included some more areas. And then we broke these down in areas really by locale, by street. Because when we think about a design of a system, I'm thinking about, well, who can we collect together? And very often we're going to be following streets. So we really looked at those kind of areas. And so then that let us break it down and say, okay, let's, looking at module 2, basically Arlington's a great place. The fishing's good, air and the water are clean. And this becomes part of this meat and potatoes of this system. And what we did was we looked at, you guys understand that on-site systems need to meet certain criteria. The sites have to be suitable basically to, accept the wastewater. There's got to be a naturally occurring layer of soil that can treat and disperse the wastewater. And we're going to talk about this a little bit. You got to have a minimum depth of naturally occurring soil that is above the springtime water table. There's got to be enough soil above bedrock. And you need to, it needs to be able to, it's got to be permeable. It can't be a heavy clay. You guys got good sands and whatnot, and then the other thing that was a big impactor in a lot of your areas is going to be, you've got to have enough room on the lot. So this becomes a density issue. So, because a system can range in size from really literally for a single family home as small as needing only 250 square feet of area for a replacement system. Oh, and on a marginal site where, we can be talking about as large as 3,000 to 5,000 square feet. Once you start bringing in a mound and identifying, protecting areas down below it, we have to look at slope. We can't typically we can't do anything on a slope greater than 20%. And the last thing that impacts our area here is that we have areas of floodplain. So those are the kind of the constraints. Whoops. And so again, what we did was this is a map where we looked at the soils information, and there's a map in the report, a figure that has all the different soil numbers and their names. And what I did was I just took that, and this is similar to what Otter Creek looked at, and I broke it into three different color zones. And we have the green, which were good for soils, very favorable. So this is part of your tongue of sand that comes in, and very often this sand is 15 to 20 feet deep. Okay, so that's very favorable. The yellow, in some cases, they're not, they might be too steep, but they have really good deep soils, like the sand, so you can reshape them. They might be, as we look in some of these areas, we get into some steeper, not so good soils, more silt loams and whatnot. And so what I did was I then went in after I developed this map. I went into Vermont DEC's permit search tool, where I could look in each one of these areas and look at for permits that had been issued by the state and say, wow, yeah, these people had to put in, they could put something in. It was an in-ground system, you know. And so this becomes a very informative map in to me, saying, okay, we've got a lot of really what we would across the state call Vermont gold. You can do something here. So we started to look at each area. So we can see this is up northeast of town. Here's the Yellow Barns. Here's the Yellow Barn site. And so, but most of this soils is really nice soil, unless you're down on the floodplain or you're down into some silty loams here. And then up here, what was happening is your area was getting steeper. So it wasn't that you couldn't do something; it was still all the same sand. That doesn't really help when you get the super high density. And what we found across these areas, where some of these lots in here, they were using alternative technologies like a mound with uh, also with a Presby, certain technology that could allow them to shrink the size in half. And you're still trying to maintain your isolation and get waivers to property line isolation distances and whatnot. This was again the same kind of soil. These soils in here, it's flat. They're great soils. We have some density issues. They just say but these, in my sense of systems is where you've got good soils like this, you can make systems work on site. Here we come to area 3, and here's the school property. Whoops, I'm keep working on my wrong screen. Here's the school property here. And again, we have this really nice tongue. This is the neighboring property. And then this gets right onto the corner of Mac Molding. But this is a highly we got a lot of eggs in this basket kind of thing. If this is, if this proves out to be good, there's a lot of capacity here that could look at it. They also have the wastewater treatment plant is here. One thing one of the things we broke down and said, okay, what are the properties there? And not really going over that as much as I'm focusing on what we found as solutions. What we found up here, or what we found as an assessment, is we found that, this was not that sandy tongue. We start to go up the hill there and you start to get into some silt loams. There are places we can find shallow to bedrock within 20 inches. And then there's a lot of places with the silt loam where we've got a water table that's less than 24 inches, which makes less than 42 inches means we're going to have to bring the system up out of the ground. Okay, and if you can imagine, you've got a lot of sand, but there's a lot of places where you're not going to dig in the springtime and the water table will be down 3.5 feet. That's really what we're looking at. This area south of East Arlington here, we're coming out Warmbrook Road. And again, in each of these areas, I found permits that had been issued. These folks had to do a raised mound because it's shallow water table, and then they had to spend and do a Presby raised system, which allowed them to reduce the size of the footprint, and they still needed a variance to from the isolation distance to property lines. So that's what we're seeing here is that, again, there aren't very many in this area, but it's a shallow water table is a real problem here. In some of these red areas, this is where the water table is at 0 to 6 inches in the springtime. It's wet. This is the last area 5 is up, north of East Arlington. Here's East Arlington Road going out of town. And again, they've got this was an area that had a lot of weathered bedrock that was, as close as a foot to the ground. And where there's not bedrock, often in this kind of topography, there's water. So where you did find some deeper pockets, you had water table that was going to be high. But right up at the end of our area, there's some really fine, some good soils. Let's see. So really, as an overall summary, we've got you have a lot of prime property in these areas outside of town. You have some smaller spots where you've just got our limitations really talk about some of our steeper slopes, the lot size when they're small, the floodplain and the high water table. So we went on to look at the current utility assessment, and Jamie and I, and we were out, and Jamie toured us the plant, and we looked at the plans. We went and did the smell test, and then I also talked with the operator. Online has all of your reports and performance. This system is a smoothly performing, adequate system for what it's doing right now. I talked with Ian. Ian, his comments were, if we don't have any hiccups, the thing goes great. The hiccup can be even like last summer, the school put in some low flow fixtures. And so it kind of threw the system out of balance for a couple months. I think you guys showed some high suspended solids, and the school, Ian said he was just getting a letter that says, we saw this and what's the scoop? Ian reported back the situation, and it's fine. the average flows here, in the during the school year run right about 3,500 gallons a day. If you smooth out, they have some different operating procedures where they basically put the whole system on pause during the weekend, and they let the incoming effluent from the daycare and the library. They've got like a 14,000 gallon tank that they can do surge control, and then they get things ramped back up in the during the week. The permit's for 18,000 gallons a day. They have some days in the winter. They have right now across at the elementary school, the library. I think it's at the elementary school there that they have a sump pump in the basement that when it's raining and it's springtime, they pump it out. And during the summer or just a normal wet time, they pump it out onto the ground. In the winter, when it can freeze on the road, they pump it right directly to the plant, and you can see it. You can see those blips. They have hit 18,000 gallons before during those kind of events. This plant does not have any redundancy. Currently today, if you're getting a plant permitted, you would have to have at least basically 1.5 the required system so that if something went down, you wouldn't be out. This is a single component train. If one item goes out, the system's going to be bypassed and it's out. We talked with the state. I mean, there's in some of the historical reports, they've said, gosh, if we move this to Cold Brook, or if we move the outtake 1,000 feet, we could double the capacity up to over 3,500,000. If we moved it a greater distance, we could maybe quadruple those flows. I did have some discussions with the state, the NPDES people, and they said, technically there's hydraulic capacity, but we can't give any formal answer without a proposal. But his knowledge of the waters of this area, most likely any increase in flows is going to add additional nutrient reductions. Right now, this plant is only required to look at organic loading, BOD, suspended solids, and then disinfection. They check the nutrients because that's just for monitoring only. If they had nutrient requirements, they would need some aggressive extra treatment to deal with that, because it's so. But that being said, we had a side discussion the other day, and we were talking about the fact that there's an opportunity to use this permit up to 18,000 gallons a day, and if we tightened up and make sure we weren't getting infiltration, then all of a sudden this could have a capacity of what is essentially 12 pump outs of septage, 12,000 gallons on a daily basis with some control and hold. So there's some, not with the existing infrastructure of work that's under the permit, that would really require it would require a new plant. Essentially, I've got some tankage and really looking at that. But I think that's really a valuable option. So when we talk about the regulatory environment, these systems, and I know this isn't really always new news to you guys, but so there's the regional office group, and they permit up to 6,500 gallons a day, that's the equivalent of 25 single family homes. And we talked about those soil conditions and the water table and those that we talked about earlier in module 3. Those are all spelled out in the wastewater rules. They say, it's formulaic. You need to show that you can maintain separation to water table above ledge. You have to show that you can get the liquid in the ground and move it away. It's got to have somewhere to go. It's really nice about the regional office rules is that's really kind of pretty much one and done. You don't need to, it's a permit for the life of the system. You may have some advanced treatment that you need to send in an annual inspection report, but that's a one and done. Once you get over 6,500 gallons a day, you go into the indirect discharge program. And really, when you are keeping it certainly below 10,000 gallons a day, it's very similar to the permit at the regional office in performance. You can just use a septic tank type system. You get benefits for improved treatment. You get a general permit, and you need to send in fees, and you need to renew that permit every 5 years. And that will get you up to, even up to 30,000 gallons a day, which all of a sudden you start to talk about, 150 homes. Once you go above that 30,000 and above, you're gonna require something more than just simple treatment. You're going to be required to do an organic reduction, and and TSS again, much like the school plant. But that's very easy to do, generally speaking, with residential domestic waste. If we go over 50,000 gallons a day, then we start to go and you have, again, a new category that puts you into needing to have nutrient reduction. And you can do that. It just every time you up these categories, the nutrient reduction is going to probably triple the cost of the treatment infrastructure. So this becomes, to me, an important places where in some of the game, if you will, you say, how do you fit in to make things work? I'm just going to breeze through this because I am not the funding guy, and so these just really, we start to look at where, based on your eligibility, where the potential big pieces for grants or where and there are different programs. I mean, you guys Otter Creek has their proposal into the SRF folks. USDA has grants for water and for small projects.
David, if I can chime in, we did put in for the CWSRF pool for this current round, the top line. So we had previously done that last year, and we just repeated it this year.
Right. And that's much through the and that's through the Otter Creek.
Yes,
Right.
That's the other side. But anyway.
Yeah, and you know what? I really meant to take a lot more breaths in this past 25 minutes and get input. But I tend to just keep rolling along and don't mean it to be just
I mean,
me.
you're like 4 slides from the end. Do you want to just finish out the slideshow and then you can go?
That's what we'll do. Because this really becomes the the final scope item. It's really, where do we want to go from here? And that's really going to inform us to say what can we put together on the table so that we can get a plan two and we can continue our technical assistance service. And so it really becomes dependent on your goals. Is it, right now what's happening, we've got infrastructure options for the village center. And that's, in my 50,000-foot view, it feels like that's a critical component of what you guys are trying to do. Say, how do we keep the center alive? What we need to do is a little bit of, we are technically by our scope outside of what they're doing. And we have been meeting with Otter Creek every other week. We have a quick meet to say to let them know where we're at. Because I think in this phase two, as we kind of push forward, we want to continue and improve that, wherever we can, that collaboration. Do we want to I think one of the things that we need to think about from our end is we need to think about what are we going to produce for you folks, and what is going to be our deliverable, if you will. And typically those deliverables are either going to be kind of a solutions plan that kind of flushes out the alternatives, and then helps you apply for any funding based on that, or it leads to a PER. With Otter Creek's involvement, it really makes sense to me, and I really have their report. As you can see, we took some of their stuff right from their report, because it applied out here. But we can also look at, developing a specific wastewater management kind of plan for what you're trying to do. We've talked, last time we met, we talked about, a voluntary townwide incentive-based management program to just remind folks and that they've got infrastructure in the ground. And so, and we can think about what else. And it really may be that this is going to lead us to the next step, being some kind of work group or work, session to really kind of facilitate what are our options for goals. What is, put those up on the whiteboard and then say, where are we? Is it really, and which is some low-hanging fruit, and, what do we think is the options for success, both finding funding and then both finding political community support. I mean, we talked about this was from the last meeting, was really trying to create, look at some management options, looking at that tank pump out support, if we had some capacity to pump out, 15 systems a day in the summer, then that's a lot of capacity. And you can look at how are we doing that outreach and whatnot. And so what we really get to is what can we do next? If if we wanted to, for instance, I looked at 4 or 5 properties in each one of our areas and looked for permits that I could find, just to make sure it was true. If we wanted to have a records repository or something, we might want to look for every record in each of those individual zones, say what's really been done. Can we really get a pulse of what's there? To look, yeah.
So
It-
what do you mean about that? Do you mean like to make sure that what you think the soils are in a particular area are in fact the soils that are there, and to have that on record somehow? Is that what you
Yeah,
mean?
and Cynthia, it kind of, to me, it depends also, is if you want to look at being a receptacle for instance, or to develop a pump out program. And then all of a sudden you can become a records keeper, but
Okay, I see. I see. I
and
see.
and so that, to me, that provides some value to your customers or to your community, because we're doing so. Or it's to look at if there are some areas like down in area 4, down to the south of East Arlington, you might be able to find more options. I'll be honest with you, it's really hard for me to envision how it makes a lot of sense to go into some of those areas, like Area 2, which was down Route 7A, where they've got great soils. We can't really hardly provide them a more economical service other than, if they can't do anything. And but they could be well served by having a program that incentivized them to make sure they check their septic tanks and get them pumped as needed. And that could come with a management plan that was a voluntary kind of plan. It, so I think these are the things that we need to kind of develop a vision, and then march towards that. I mean, and it really needs some collaboration with Otter Creek, and we have the potential to do a solutions plan within a solutions plan that would allow us to come out and do some investigatory work on the school and the neighboring property right next to the school for a large community dispersal field. We can look potentially north of Arlington, and I mapped out area 1, which is a kind of across the river by the Yellow Barn. But there's a little bit of the water surface area that is due north of Arlington. It has about 5 lots. And there's some really good property up there as far as soil. It feels complicated with the politics of the Yellow Barn site and the politics of the East Arlington site, the Mac molding site gone. And in some ways we're looking at needing, if we were looking for a single spot solution for the 2 villages, and maybe the road directly in between that has some problem sites, we're looking at a system with a flow, based on Otter Creek, we're talking about, 100,000 gallons, that ballpark. So we did look at that. I have looked at that and say, gosh, how much land do you need for a dispersal field? And it's not acres. So there's a lot of property around the school that we could look at and evaluate. and say, what are the rough capacities here as an estimate, this as a solutions, and put together some cost numbers for that. I've got to just take a breath and say, did I give enough time for wheels to turn? Or
Yeah, I think this is a really good overview, and once we have the Otter Creek study as well, I think we will have a sense of what are the physical and regulatory possibilities in all the different areas of town. What are the capacities? And then, as you say, you have the overlay of ownership, interest, and the politics of it, and who controls what. And I think that's going to be incredibly valuable going forward, because there may be areas in East Arlington or the center of town or south of town that right now the owner says no. And then 10 years from now, 20 years from now, they say yes. So all of this stuff is like knowledge capital to go forward with. But as you already know, I am really interested in coming up with actual concrete things to do. So I'm very much in favor of the management plan, trying to figure out ways to help people manage their private infrastructure. And I'm very much in favor of exploring the possibilities of the school site, either in terms of making the most of the facility that's already at the school, or possibly creating an in-ground site, because that's the only area that I mean, not that the town doesn't control it, the school controls it, but it's the only thing that's under some degree of community control.
Right.
The other, even though Yellow Barn is owned by the town, we've got some issues there that right now seem intractable. So if we're going to get anywhere, it's going to be at the school. And we knew this when we started, that this might be where we go, but it was worth exploring everything, and they still might work out. But right now, what we've got is the school. So, to me, and I want to hear from everybody else, but to me, to be able to do some soil tests and find out if there really are possibilities there, because we don't know that for sure, for something in ground. And Todd Wilkins is here today, and he's on the school board, and he knows these issues. So one of the things that I'm very concerned about is how to work with the school board, how to keep them informed and see what their priorities are, because I don't want it to be like we're coming in and saying, oh, we're going to do all this kind of stuff. So that's where I am. The next steps for the management plan, the next steps for how can we explore the school options, both with the soil test, but before we do that, we have to do the outreach to the school board. And then if we end up with other possibilities, so much the better.
Right.
And Todd, I'd really like to hear, what you think of all this. I know you haven't I know you've been at a number of the meetings, but not all of them. And as I said, I'm really concerned about not making any assumptions about where the board would be on any of this.
I think the board would certainly support any ability to improve our current, to improve our infrastructure. And of course, one of the hopes and goals is that eventually someday it can be expanded, because one of the things that we need, you even talked about this, David, is our population has stayed very stagnant. And part of the reason when a population stays stagnant, a population ages, and the school needs children to survive. So, in order to bring in children, you need to have suitable homes, whether that is multi-family homes, single-family homes. But as you can see, there's not a lot of area to build and put a septic on. So we need to have opportunities for those smaller lots and things like that to have wastewater treatment. If we already have town water in those areas, we're not worried about wells. So if we can add wastewater to those and make them buildable, things like that, then I think the school's certainly going to support any use of its system and its property. That could potentially, I'm not saying it's going to, but could potentially lead down that road. And also to help, we have a lot of properties in Arlington existing that are a bit dilapidated or that may need some, but people don't want to put the money into them because of maybe concerns of septics and things like that. And if we can start to address some of those in our village areas of East Arlington and down here, then I think that also helps as well. So this isn't anything new for me. So
Right.
and I know that our board members would certainly support any exploration use of our properties and system.
And what would be the best procedure should the select board write a letter to the school board proposing that we'd like to have, Dave Cotton or whoever be doing these soil tests? What is the best procedure?
I mean, I would just I am the school board chair, so sending me
Okay.
an email so that I can share it with the board. And if you need approval, then by step
I mean,
by
I
step.
want to have a record. I want to be
Yep.
sure that nobody
Yeah.
feels like they're being,
Yep.
pushed into anything.
Yeah, so whatever the first step is, if
Okay.
we start doing soil tests, then, the board would certainly approve that.
Okay,
I mean, Jamie is our head of facilities.
right,
so-
right, right,
So that's
right.
another win and
Right.
Jamie can arrange it so that it's done when, either that kids are inside or kids aren't in school. I mean,
Okay.
school's only got about 6 weeks left, so
Okay,
we're kind of coming into the right time to be doing that kind of work too.
okay.
Right. And I think that, for instance, at the school site, the big piece of the property is the soccer field there.
Yep.
And there's actually a number of school athletic fields in Vermont that we're using. And so that doesn't, at the same time, there's also, those grounds are pretty big. So as we look and say, and I certainly would, it doesn't sound like I need to, but we could meet with the school board and, it becomes the politics that is not my bailiwick. My philosophy is, open, full disclosure, and here's what we're trying to do.
I think it makes sense maybe to meet with the school board after you have results.
Yeah.
Just to do soil tests, and you definitely don't want to, I mean, I think you're gonna have to dig up parts of the field, so you gotta be careful about soccer and all that kind of stuff. But one thing that does bother me is that you were talking about Fisher Elementary pumping out its basement.
It's
No,
not Fisher, it's in the high school.
it's the high
Yeah.
school?
We
Because
went-
it comes off the hillside? Oh, okay.
I've got the schools on the wrong side of the road.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's
it's
all right.
all
I was just worrying about the water table at Fisher.
And there's
So it's the
water-
high school because of water coming off
Shallow
the
soils,
hillside.
if they're too big.
Okay,
bedrock.
And bedrock, okay, all right,
Yeah,
I'm
it's
sorry.
that boiler room
I was
sump
just
up,
worried
right,
about, wait a
Todd?
minute, is the water
Really,
table.
really, the school was built in the early 1900s, so
Right.
the drainage around the school isn't great.
Not great, yeah,
Of course, we don't want to dump $250,000 into drainage if
No,
we can do it with
no,
a sump
no,
pump.
so you just.
Obviously, if this becomes an option where you're using this for something other than our sump pumping, we will come up with a different plan.
Right, Right, no, we can do it, that's
Groundwater.
just rainwater, that's rainwater.
Yeah, it's easy to deal with. That's.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I just was, I was getting nervous about the water table in that field. I didn't
Nope.
see how it could be high, but.
Right, that was my mistake.
No, that's all right.
Okay.
That's all right. You're excused.
David, I really appreciated this presentation this evening. It would be great if we could get a copy of this slide deck.
You will.
Super helpful for us. In my opinion, from listening to everything and your presentation here, it seems like the takeaways for us as a committee and the select board to build some direction for phase 2 is probably a short-term solutions plan, a long-term solutions plan, some application that once we have those, then we can do application for funding, right? And I think at the same time, what I've heard Cynthia say and what I've heard members of the committee say in other meetings is that in tandem or in parallel, we really want to investigate that kind of management program, right? And whether it's a pump out program or something like that. So kind of running both of those in parallel so that we can get some actionable items and maybe a little bit of movement to actually get something started.
Yeah, I think that's a really, I think, I'm glad you guys have a long view because it's already been long and it's not going to get a lot shorter. And one of the things that really moves the ball is the public saying, "Oh, this is an important issue. Oh, understanding that this is potentially the most expensive piece of their infrastructure
Hmm.
for their utilities, and provide there's a lot of opportunity for kind of just community education. And then if you're able to develop a program, for instance, that says, oh, we've got within a funding program an opportunity to do septic tank upgrades and bring risers to grade kind of thing. Or there's an opportunity you can explore, through some of the SRF funding kind of things, you can be a pass-through to help people get their individual systems fixed. That may be further than we want to go, but really that changing that culture and saying, yeah, let's pump your tank, and maybe with that, if you look at the literature, it says, the rule of thumb is every 3 to 5 years, you ought to pump your tank. Well, and that's because if you did that, you would have pretty close to 90% compliance of them being pumped when they should be. At the same time, if I'm living alone and I have 1,000-gallon tank, once my system is and I'm not using a garbage disposal, it literally might be 10 years before I need to pump my tank. And it's really easy. I have a riser on my tank. I can open it up and I can stick a pipe down there and I can pull up a column of the water and I measure how much solids I have in the bottom of the tank. It pulls it right. And if my tank is 30% full of solids, I need to pump it. But if it's only 10% full, let it ride. So
Literally what I did at town hall not too long ago.
and so that could be another service that if people have a riser, every 3 years, somebody can come by. Go ahead.
Another thing along those lines is that at the last meeting, Nick was suggesting that Josh Brace might be able to do septic tank inspections because he has that training. He's the water department operator, but I was like, no, we're not, the water department customers are not paying for him to do this. But then it occurred to Nick and me that we could have the town reimburse the water department for his time. So if we started a pump out system, and by the way, Ty, one of the things was to explore pumping out system, having a company do the pump outs and put them at the school, and then there might be a discount because they don't have to do, and it would like during this, and we would only do it during the summer when the system needs stuff anyway, so that kind of stuff. So if we started having some kind of pump out system, if we started having some kind of inspection system, and then that gets us going with this idea that we're going to support people managing that infrastructure and trying to make it easier to do. And then when people have absolute crisis, horrible situations, if we can figure out a way to get them that funding when they're low income or whatever, so that we're really becoming more active in helping people, because I think those are doable. Whether we can ever have community-based systems, I don't know, but this other stuff I think is doable. And so that's what we're, and he's letting the dogs out. Who let the dogs out?
Right?
David, I have a quick question for you. Is there anything that if let's say Arlington, I'm talking totally hypothetical, but Arlington creates a system at the school because our soils, work out well. We're able to hook 20 new homes on, or 20 homes onto it, whatever it is. And that's permitted for that many gallonage. If somewhere down the road, the town was able to then have another opportunity, and I'll just use the yellow barn, I'm not saying it will work, but let's just say it does work. And then could they put in a totally separate system down there? And would it be two separate permit processes? Or would you have to permit it as one for total?
So you would, that's a great example. Okay, so what you did, first off, you said, what if we looked at a site here at the school and then one at the yellow barn? Okay, so those are two different distinct hydrologic systems. I mean, they're both feeding the bat and kill. I mean, right, but they are not compounding each other. If you tried to put that second system at the school,
Mhm.
then that would act like one permit.
Yeah.
Okay. So you could be the permit holder. And so that that really is a great question because then all of a sudden you start to look at, if you were to look at splitting it into smaller, then I really wanted to plant the seed that size matters. If you're under 6,500 gallon, 25 homes, and that's what I did is I looked at these numbers and said, where is the cutoff based on equivalent homes to be at, with every jump in regulatory hoop, and it's really based on risk. So I mean, I call it a regulatory hoop, but it's really the more flow we have, the more potential risk we have, the more potential nutrients can rob the oxygen out of or create algae blooms.
Mhm.
The one thing about it, I mean, when we first started this whole process, the idea of these community-based systems, like one in East Arlington, one for the center of town, whether built on the school or built someplace else, that always made sense to me because it didn't seem to me there was a centrally located, good place to have a giant one. I mean, even the school, we probably can't have a giant one, so it always made sense. But at the same time, you have three small systems. Oh my God, you have to build 3 treatment plants, treatment systems. Just the fixed costs are just daunting. It's daunting to me to think of that.
But I look at, I mean, I'm not saying that the system at the school would meet today's standards, but that is not an overly expensive, that was not an overly expensive
Right.
system to put in, and it wouldn't be today.
Okay.
Compared to a much larger treatment of 100,000 gallons or more, would be significantly.
Well, and see, the other thing that occurred to me, and I don't even know if this makes sense, and David doesn't know if this would even be possible, is we have this school system, keep that functioning, serving the school and everything it currently serves, and that's a direct discharge, direct flow. And then if the school soils are appropriate, and possibly the neighboring soils too, if that were to be possible, build an in-ground system there. So you would essentially have 2 systems.
Right.
And that would handle what the school can't get of the center of Arlington. Doesn't take care of East Arlington. We still have that, that issue out there that we have to work on. But and I don't know if that will work or not, because I like the idea of having a larger system on the property that the community controls, but I don't like the idea of getting rid of a system that's working and that we spent money on, so I'm, I just want to throw that out there. But that, and David said he had no idea what the regulators would say about that.
On the face of it, it feels like they could look favorably upon something like that because they're 2 different system regimes. When we talk about one of the things, though, and it's like, as you mentioned, that plan at the school, it's really a simple plan. It's just like, it's got these discs that just roll around. They just
aerates it. It just aerates the stuff.
Just aerates it. It brings the bugs out of the water, back in the water, and And I can tell you that you can do those simple kind of systems in the permitting world for up to 50,000 gallons a day. And 50,000 gallons a day is like 200 homes. So as you just start to think, once you get over that 50,000 gallons a day, now you just jumped a big hurdle. At 50,000 gallons a day, potentially, you know, I'm looking at it, I looked at it, you need about 2.5 acres of dispersal field. That's not huge.
Wow.
We have more than that right at the school, the soils.
It's not huge.
Yeah.
So you've got, you know, as you get bigger, you've got bigger isolation distances. You got, you know, but so these things really aren't out of the question. And if we only have to meet the same standards that the school system meets, that isn't a real high dollar. It's not a complex system. You know,
But are you talking about an outflow system or an in-ground system?
in-ground system.
Yeah, in-ground system.
And so if you use an in-ground system with doing the same kind of treatment that the plant does now,
Yeah,
then you can have half the system. And in fact, all of a sudden that system may go down and be, you know, closer to less than an acre. So
and see,
again,
like, how many
David-
water department customers are there, like
424.
400? Yeah, so if we got to 200 houses, we'd probably be covering
That's
a
half.
huge chunk of, except we got the Easter Island thing.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Nick.
No,
go ahead.
no.
I'm talking
David, are
about
there any issues that you would perceive in this concept of parallel systems at the school related to isolation distances between the pipes of the two different systems? Like, would a regulator maybe have fears that, you know, a leak on the pipe feeding the field be causing issues with the other system not working? You know, the fear would be that these systems would not be treated as like hydrologically separate.
right.
And-
So you would have to be aware of that and spell that out in your design and say, what are you doing to prevent any kind of cross connection, if you will? That you're looking at, because you would, and again, as Cynthia said, we have not brought the idea of using that, you know, having dual systems there on the same property. Okay.
Yeah, and, you know, I'm just making this up, so, you know.
No,
It's
but
like-
it's an obvious
No,
good
I think
idea.
that's an obvious choice, because
Right.
if you have the wastewater treatment plant that's there now, which discharges into Warmbrook,
Yeah,
and you have an in-ground system, say in the pit,
yeah,
there's a huge elevation change between the two.
Yeah.
you
yeah,
know,
you keep the
10,
pipes
15 feet.
and just, and you can
And
do
there's
the
a distance
isolation with
between them.
the
Yeah,
other,
vertical
what
separation.
pipes are below
Of
and on
course,
top and all
of
that
course.
kind of stuff. All right, well, then,
All I was gonna say was
Yeah.
several years ago, we had to put about $25,000 into the system, new ultraviolet lights, stuff like that. It was required every 25 years. And one of the conversations that the board had at the time, we own this land, right? We can put an in-ground system in. We don't have a lot of flow rates. But we opted to put that money into the system in hopes that someday it could be used for
And
an
expanded,
expansion
yeah,
for the
yeah,
town.
yeah.
Because the school doesn't need this system.
no,
The
and that's
school could get
the,
away with an in-ground system with our property, but we just
That's
feel
right.
that it's an overall benefit for the good as opposed to just the school. So we opted to put that money into it, those years ago and continue to put money into it, hopes that.
Right.
that-
yeah,
and
and if we ended up doing some kind of pump out that used the school system during the summer as a disposal site, that might mitigate some of the having to feed the system
Yeah.
during the summer, and
Yeah.
also we would be paying the school
Mhm.
something to do that, like, we're not assuming that would be free, you know, so that there would be ways to, there would be ways to recognize the investment that the school has made in that, you know, in that system and in any future thing, and I think that can all be worked
Yeah,
out, that
absolutely.
can all be
No
worked
question
out.
It certainly, as you guys know, it certainly becomes another political hot potato, potentially, when you start talking about, in order to make that system at the school really handle and be comfortable handling more than 2 or 3 pump outs a day in the summer, when it's permitted to handle 15, it really needs to be upgraded.
Sure.
And so
Or-
then
or
all of a
we
sudden,
just do-
and so I'm just recognizing that then a
Yeah,
board
but-
member says, wait a minute, how's that working? It's not our job to make to have a business, but again, it's bringing those people along in that community.
But also, we don't necessarily have to do 15 pump outs a day. We could do 3 pump outs a day, 2 pump outs a day. And at least at first, just to get started with that, and not to impose extra cost, to try to be just using the system to advantage. I'm sorry, Dan, go ahead. You were
No,
gonna say-
what I was gonna say is, at least what I'm thinking in the back, this is just thoughts going through my head, is if we use the school system to solve the inherent problem of Blair Court area between the 2 big areas,
Oh,
and then use the infield system below to catch
village
maybe
area.
2 sides of the village areas.
Yeah.
Maybe half of each side.
Yeah,
And then combined with the pump outs, that's probably a 60% solution to the whole problem.
Oh, yeah, because it addresses all the worst soils.
Because
or
it
almost all
addresses the worst
soils.
and Blair
possible.
Court is right there.
Blair Court is like red zone.
It is the singular worst.
Yeah,
Our line
wastewater
runs,
problem.
Right past it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. And it runs right beyond it.
It's a clean shot.
But I'm thinking out loud that maybe that's combining those 3 elements, at least for now, is a good start and a big bite of the apple for getting as much of these taken care of in this first phase even. If we could do that in
No, I think
1 or
that,
2
I think,
phases.
I think that if like 10 years from now, we had done those things, that would be incredible.
It's gonna show
And
a
then
huge
we
difference.
can still keep the other possibilities that the different studies have identified alive. So that if some sort of landowner, or some sort of willing landowner steps up, boom, we're right there.
Well, there's one other possibility I thought of for East Arlington Road, and that is there's a cul-de-sac off the end of Town Line Road. Way up on the end of East Arlington Road, and it's on your map, I saw it. The
Yeah,
center of that cul-de-sac, there's nothing built there, it's all around the outside of it. And perhaps, this just throwing it out there to maybe have a discussion with the developer. Perhaps you could do a smaller in-ground field
For part
to
of East
catch
Arlington.
part of East Arlington on the north side of that zone.
So, but those houses have their
They all have
septic all
septics,
around
but
there,
if you
but
put
in the
in a
middle, no, I'm
septic
aware, it's a
for
big
one in the
area.
middle, it's a large area. You could fit a football field and maybe 2 crisscross in there. It's a pretty big sized area.
Yeah, that's
But,
true.
and I'm sure he has plans for developing some of those interior spots. But maybe in some sort of a negotiation, you might be able to acquire.
I don't know. that-
Fall, no, but there is one really nice quality of that. Doing this unlocks development capacity for that developer.
Exactly.
Because it automatic,
Right.
because the advent of this gives them an automatic upzoning.
And that gives an incentive to, at least partially, on the short terms, still kill 2 birds with one stone.
That's right, and that's what we were
And the
hoping.
housing issue.
Yeah.
That's what we were
It lets them
hoping
shrink
for
to
in East
minimum
Arlington.
lots.
That's the key to East Arlington. I think you're
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's the right place. I'm not sure.
It might
what
not be the right
existing
place, but
owners
I was
would
looking
say
at
about
the,
that.
I was
Nobody
looking at
seems
the
to want to live
soils,
next to us.
and I was looking at the area.
We all
knowing
do.
the area.
We've all got
So,
septic systems in our backyard.
But-
All right,
But that's one
Anyway.
possibility. for
that's interesting.
Catching a part of that zone that maybe isn't part of what we're talking
Yeah.
about here.
No,
Yeah.
that's really cool.
so and I think that really leads us to think about pushing towards a solutions plan kind of thing, because with a solutions plan, we can do much what I tried to do tonight, say, here are the pieces of the puzzle. And they're going to fit differently at different times. And you know what? The state changes their rules. And so those the pieces of puzzles won't necessarily fit like they do today in 10 years.
Right.
But
I don't think we can do, we're not going to get anywhere fast unless our next step is a solutions plan.
Exactly. I think we're universal on that one.
Yeah.
100%.
So you have your plan.
And see, and within that, we can put in some pricing kind of numbers. We can look at saying, oh, here's some sweet spots, whether it be if you had just lay out those different categories as they fit to the regs.
Yep.
So that it allows a group, a committee to say, oh, how did this work? Wait, why didn't we think about it like this? If that's true, so I think that makes
Well, the solutions plan isn't a marching order. It's a solution plan, exactly as it's described. And then you can build off of that or, look and make changes to it should need be, right? But it just starts the blueprint of where to go. And from there, obviously, then, we can build some marching orders and also apply for some funding, one would hope.
Right. And see, part of those solution plans, we can really kind of see what we can, and really hard for me not to say flush out. I just can't help it. But a plan for a pump out kind of thing,
Yeah.
or a pilot plan for a pump
I love
out.
Sure.
Pilot plan, I like that. Pilot.
So thinking about how we can say, how would that work to bring in X number of loads a week, and offer to, look at that and see what's the cost. I mean, I know you can get the guys down in Bennington to come up for $350, they'll come and do it. Provided they don't have to dig up your tank.
Right.
That sounds like a plan.
All right.
Anything else we need to address tonight? Otherwise,
I don't
we'll
think
just
so.
informally end the meeting.
David, thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank
David.
you,
Thank you,
David.
Matt.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Matt.
So I'll be back in touch too, because I guess we're just gonna need to deal with
Just
some
email
issues.
Cynthia and we can go from there.
Okay. Hey,
Thank
good
you.
working with you, Nick. Good luck.
Thank you. Much appreciated. Bye-bye.